Alpha males are used to dominating the social arena. They set the tone, command attention, and establish hierarchy wherever they go. But everything shifts the moment a Sigma male walks into the same space. He doesn't challenge the alpha, doesn't compete with him, and doesn't seek recognition. Yet his presence alone disrupts the structure the alpha relies on. The Sigma operates outside the hierarchy entirely, and that's what makes him unpredictable and threatening. His quiet confidence dismantles the alpha's control without a single word. What unsettles the alpha is not weakness. It's the absence of need. He can't intimidate the Sigma, can't impress him, and can't manipulate him into playing dominance games. While the alpha tries to lead, the Sigma simply moves calmly, independently, and with a level of self-possession that pulls attention away from everyone else. People become curious about him. They gravitate toward him. They observe him. And the alpha senses something he rarely feels: competition from a man who isn't even competing. The Sigma doesn't disrupt the hierarchy, he renders it irrelevant. Before we reveal the 10 behaviors that deeply unsettle alpha males, make sure you subscribe to UltraWise for more high-retention psychological breakdowns. And if you're ready for the full list, drop "unshakable" in the comments, because these traits aren't loud or aggressive, but they shift the entire dynamic the moment a Sigma male enters the room. He stays completely calm in situations where most men feel the need to assert dominance. He walks into charged environments, rooms thick with ego, competition, and unspoken challenges, and remains completely unbothered. Where other men tense up, raise their voice, or subtly posture for dominance, he stays centered, composed, and unresponsive to the social tension around him. His calmness is not passive. It is controlled, deliberate, and deeply grounded. He doesn't puff his chest, doesn't try to outstare anyone, and doesn't match the aggressive tone that alpha males rely on to maintain their position. Instead, he observes the room with a steady gaze, unaffected by the psychological pressure that pushes most men into performance. This stillness immediately disrupts the hierarchy, because dominance games only work when both sides agree to play. His calm presence strips the alpha of the reaction he depends on. An alpha male expects resistance, challenge, or submission, all predictable responses that allow him to maintain social control. But the Sigma gives none of them. He doesn't flinch, doesn't compete, doesn't defend his space, and doesn't try to claim more of it. He simply exists with an unshakable self-possession that signals confidence without effort. This neutrality forces the alpha to confront something unfamiliar, a man who cannot be moved emotionally or socially. The Sigma's calmness communicates, without a single word, that he is not threatened and not impressed. And that unspoken message destabilizes the entire dominance dynamic. People around them sense the shift instantly. They notice that the Sigma's stillness carries more weight than the alpha's force. They feel the difference between loud confidence and deep confidence. While the alpha tries to control the room through energy, volume, or charisma, the Sigma controls it through presence. He becomes the psychological center of gravity because he does not bend or react. Others begin watching him, mirroring his calmness, or gravitating toward his grounded energy. And the alpha, suddenly, is no longer the unquestioned leader. He's a man trying too hard in a room where someone else isn't trying at all. This is what makes the Sigma so unsettling to alpha males. His calmness isn't weakness, it's dominance without aggression. It exposes how much the alpha depends on external behavior to maintain status, while the Sigma's power comes from within. The more the Sigma stays composed, the more the alpha's tactics lose their effectiveness. And in that silent shift, the Sigma takes control, not by asserting himself, but by refusing to be drawn into a battle he has already won by not participating. He doesn't react to intimidation tactics, removing the alpha's usual power. He moves through interactions with a calm, steady presence that makes intimidation fall flat the moment it's attempted. When an alpha male steps in with posturing, raised tone, direct eye contact, or subtle dominance cues, he doesn't respond with fear, defensiveness, or counter-aggression. He simply remains unmoved. His expression stays neutral, his breathing stays even, and his demeanor stays grounded. That lack of reaction is not passive, it's powerful. Intimidation requires emotional oxygen to survive, and he gives it none. Without a visible response to feed on, the alpha's usual strategies dissolve into awkward attempts at control that no longer land. Most men react to intimidation because it hits their ego or triggers a survival response, but he has trained himself to detach from that primitive dance. He sees intimidation for what it really is, insecurity disguised as dominance. Instead of escalating, he observes, Instead of shrinking, he holds his ground with effortless stillness. This calm refusal to engage is deeply unsettling for alpha males because their influence depends on predictable emotional triggers. When the sigma remains unaffected, the alpha loses access to his favorite tool, psychological pressure. The power imbalance flips silently, and the alpha senses he has no leverage. People around them notice this shift instantly. They see that the alpha's attempts to dominate create no reaction, no compliance, and no visible fear. The sigma's lack of response highlights the alpha's overreaction. It exposes the effort behind the posturing, the need behind the aggression, and the weakness behind the intimidation. And as others watch this dynamic unfold, their perception of power subtly moves away from the alpha and toward the sigma, who maintains quiet control simply by refusing to be emotionally manipulated. This is what makes the sigma so destabilizing for traditional dominant structures. He removes the alpha's advantage not by fighting back, but by rendering the battle meaningless. His neutrality reveals that intimidation only works on those who accept the rules of the game. He doesn't. And because he doesn't, the alpha can't win. The sigma's unshakable calm becomes a mirror, showing the alpha how dependent he is on reactions just to maintain status. Without those reactions, the alpha's power collapses, and the sigma remains exactly where he started, untouched, unshaken, and entirely in control. He draws attention effortlessly without trying, weakening the alpha's social control. He walks into a room without announcing himself, without adjusting his posture for effect, and without performing for an audience, yet eyes naturally shift in his direction. People sense something different in the way he carries himself, grounded, self-contained, present but not demanding presence. This effortless magnetism disrupts the social balance instantly. Alpha males depend on being the center of gravity, the loudest voice, the dominant energy in the room. But when the sigma enters, he redirects attention without even intending to. His quiet confidence becomes more compelling than the alpha's assertive charisma, and that contrast challenges the hierarchy the alpha worked hard to maintain. The attention he attracts isn't loud or dramatic, it's a subtle gravitational pull. People feel curious about him because he isn't trying to win them over. He listens instead of boasting. He observes instead of performing. He holds himself with a self-assurance that signals inner strength rather than social need. This makes others lean in, watch him more closely, and wonder what lies behind the calm exterior. The alpha feels this shift immediately, even if no words are exchanged. For a man who relies on dominance and visibility, the sigma's ability to draw attention without effort feels threatening. It exposes how much the alpha's influence depends on maintaining the spotlight, and how easily that spotlight moves when someone more authentic enters the space. What makes the sigma even more unsettling is that he has no interest in taking the alpha's place. He isn't competing for admiration, loyalty, or social control. He simply exists in his own lane, and that alone weakens the alpha's power. People trust someone who isn't trying to impress them. They respect someone who doesn't broadcast superiority. They feel safer around someone who doesn't manipulate the atmosphere. As the room gradually orients itself toward the sigma, the alpha loses the silent psychological authority he assumed he had secured. The shift happens organically, almost invisibly, and that subtlety makes it even harder for the alpha to counter. In the end, the alpha is confronted with a truth he doesn't want to acknowledge. Power obtained through display is fragile, but power rooted in authenticity is immovable. The sigma doesn't steal the spotlight, he makes it irrelevant. And that effortless influence is what destabilizes the alpha more than any challenge could. He listens more than he speaks, making others reveal themselves. He enters conversations without the urge to dominate them. Instead of competing for attention, filling silence with words, or proving his intelligence, he simply listens deeply, intentionally, and without interruption. This calm, attentive presence causes people to drop their usual filters. They begin speaking more freely, revealing their insecurities, desires, strengths, and weaknesses without realizing how much they're exposing. In a world where most men try to speak the loudest to gain control, his silence becomes a psychological advantage. People interpret his listening as interest, trust, or understanding, but in reality, he's studying the emotional architecture behind their words. And the more he listens, the more they reveal themselves in ways they never would around someone who talks too much. This is where alpha males begin to feel uncomfortable. The alpha is used to controlling the narrative, telling stories, giving directions, asserting opinions, and steering attention. But the sigma's silence disrupts that dynamic entirely. Instead of responding with admiration or resistance, he offers a subtle neutrality that leaves the alpha talking more than he intended. The sigma doesn't challenge him, but he also doesn't validate him. He holds eye contact just long enough to make the alpha continue speaking, but not long enough to feed his ego. This forces the alpha into unfamiliar territory, over-explaining, over-performing, and revealing his own motives. The sigma hasn't said a word, yet the alpha is already exposing cracks in his confidence. People around them notice the shift. They begin to speak more honestly in the sigma's presence because he doesn't compete for the spotlight or judge what they say. His listening creates a psychological safety that prompts others to share more deeply. Meanwhile, the alpha's usual dominance begins to look performative next to the sigma's effortless self-control. The room starts turning toward the man who speaks the least, not the one who speaks the most. Influence shifts quietly, almost invisibly, and the sigma becomes the real center of gravity, not by force but by presence. This is what makes him unsettling to alpha males. His silence is not emptiness, it is a mirror. While they broadcast who they want to be, he absorbs who they truly are. His listening gives him insight, leverage, and clarity that no amount of talking could ever achieve. The alpha, for the first time, feels observed instead of admired. And in that subtle reversal of power, the sigma takes control of the room without raising his voice or revealing a single intention. He rejects hierarchy, operating independently instead of following or challenging. He moves through social structures without ever stepping into the roles they try to assign him. He isn't interested in leading the group, but he isn't willing to follow it either. This refusal to participate in hierarchy, either as the dominant force or the obedient supporter, immediately disrupts the dynamic that alpha males rely on. Alphas thrive on clear positioning: who's in charge, who's beneath them, who's rising, and who's submitting. But the sigma steps completely outside that framework. He does his own thing, makes his own decisions, and follows his own internal compass without asking permission, seeking approval, or trying to overthrow anyone. His independence erases the need for hierarchy, and that erasure makes the alpha uncomfortable in ways he can't articulate. This is because the alpha's power depends on engagement. He needs the group to acknowledge his dominance. He needs competition to reinforce his strength. He needs followers to validate his leadership. But the sigma doesn't give him any of that. He doesn't challenge the alpha, so the alpha can't defeat him. He doesn't follow the alpha, so the alpha can't control him. He simply exists in a parallel direction, unaffected by the power dynamics swirling around him. This independence is more threatening than direct confrontation, because confrontation still acknowledges the alpha's role. The sigma's detachment denies it entirely. People notice this quickly. They see a man who doesn't wait for instructions, doesn't seek permission to act, and doesn't shape his identity based on group expectations. His autonomy becomes a form of quiet authority, one that doesn't need validation to be real. While the alpha asserts dominance through presence and charisma, the sigma asserts dominance through self-sufficiency. Others begin gravitating toward the one who answers to no one, the one who creates his own path instead of fighting over the existing ones. The alpha senses this shift. His influence starts to feel smaller, his position less certain, because the sigma demonstrates that leadership isn't required for power and following isn't required for belonging. This is what makes the sigma so deeply unsettling. He breaks the rules of hierarchy simply by refusing to acknowledge that the hierarchy matters. He shows that freedom is more powerful than dominance and independence more stable than authority. His quiet autonomy exposes how much the alpha depends on structure, position, and recognition to maintain control. And the sigma, standing outside all of it, becomes the one man the alpha cannot measure, categorize, or influence. That alone dismantles the comfort the alpha once had, because the presence of someone who doesn't play the game threatens the game itself. He maintains emotional neutrality, making it impossible to provoke him. He moves through social tension with a steady emotional core that refuses to be shaken. While others react instinctively, anger rising, ego flaring, defensiveness kicking in, he remains composed, unreadable, and almost detached from the emotional noise around him. That neutrality isn't coldness, it's control. He doesn't allow adrenaline or ego to dictate his behavior. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't take the bait, and doesn't respond to psychological jabs meant to trigger a reaction. This creates an unsettling imbalance. People who rely on provoking emotional responses suddenly find themselves powerless because nothing they do stirs him. His calm becomes a barrier they cannot penetrate. Alpha males, in particular, struggle with this. Their dominance depends on influencing the emotional tone of the environment, asserting pressure, sparking tension, or creating a sense of hierarchy through intimidation or assertion. But when the sigma stays neutral, none of these tactics land. The alpha pushes harder, expecting to trigger the usual reactions, but his efforts bounce off a man who simply refuses to engage emotionally. This lack of response exposes the alpha's own reliance on external control. The sigma doesn't get angry, doesn't get flustered, and doesn't get drawn into ego battles. He remains still, calculating, grounded. That stillness disarms the alpha more effectively than confrontation ever could. People around them feel the shift as well. They see a man who cannot be manipulated, pressured, or emotionally pushed off center. His neutrality creates a psychological gravity that others start to respect instinctively. Without speaking a word, he communicates that he decides when and how he engages, and only on his terms. The alpha loses his advantage because he can't dominate someone he can't emotionally influence. And the sigma, without aggression or resistance, ends up controlling the situation simply by refusing to react. He moves with purpose, not performance. Exposing superficial behavior, he navigates every environment with a quiet intentionality that stands in sharp contrast to the performance-driven energy many men rely on. While others exaggerate gestures, raise their voices, or showcase confidence to appear dominant, he acts only when there is a clear reason. His movements are deliberate, efficient, and free of ego. He walks into a room without needing to be noticed, speaks only when his words add value, and chooses his actions based on internal direction rather than external validation. This calm sense of purpose creates an unmistakable presence. People feel the difference immediately. He isn't trying to prove anything. He's simply aligned with himself. This is where alpha males start to feel exposed. Their power often depends on visibility, charisma, and commanding attention tools that work well on most people but fall flat against someone who doesn't care about social theatrics. The sigma's purposeful behavior makes the alpha's performance look exaggerated, unnecessary, and rooted in insecurity rather than strength. Without saying a word, the sigma reveals the gap between authentic confidence and manufactured dominance. The alpha senses the contrast and feels the discomfort of being measured, not by how loudly he acts, but by how grounded he truly is. Others in the room pick up on this dynamic quickly. They sense that the sigma's presence comes from substance, not display. His silence carries more weight than another man's speech. His stillness feels more powerful than someone else's posturing. People begin to recalibrate subconsciously, shifting their respect toward the one who doesn't demand it. And as the sigma continues to move with calm clarity, superficial behavior becomes impossible to hide. What used to look impressive now looks performative. What used to feel dominant now feels unnecessarily loud. The sigma, never intended to expose anyone but purpose, naturally outshines performance. His focus on inner alignment, rather than external impact, destabilizes the entire dominance script. And in that silent comparison, the alpha's theatrics lose their effect, while the sigma's authenticity becomes the quiet force everyone recognizes but no one can challenge. He doesn't seek approval, unsettling those who rely on validation games. He moves through social environments without the slightest need to be liked, praised, or acknowledged. While many people subtly adjust their tone, posture, or behavior to gain approval, he remains completely consistent with who he is. He doesn't tailor his personality for acceptance, doesn't soften his opinions to fit in, and doesn't exaggerate his achievements to impress anyone. This lack of meatiness is rare and deeply unsettling to those who build their identity on external validation. When someone refuses to play the approval game, the entire social structure shifts. The people who rely on praise as currency suddenly lose their influence because he is immune to the very thing that motivates them. Alpha males feel this disruption immediately. Their social power often depends on controlling attention, approval, and recognition. They expect others to react to their status, respect their authority, or seek their acceptance. But the sigma gives them nothing. He doesn't flinch in the presence of status. He doesn't adjust his behavior to win favor. He doesn't show excitement when acknowledged or disappointment when ignored. His neutrality removes the alpha's leverage entirely. Without the ability to manipulate approval, the alpha loses his primary psychological weapon. The sigma's self-contained nature exposes how dependent the alpha is on being validated, while the sigma needs none of it to feel aligned or powerful. This unshakable independence quietly influences everyone around them. People begin noticing that the sigma's confidence comes from within, not from how others respond to him. They see a man who sets his own standards and refuses to let the crowd define his value. And in contrast, the validation seekers suddenly appear fragile, constantly performing, constantly adjusting, constantly needing emotional rewards to stay afloat. The Sigma never calls attention to this difference, but simply by being unaffected, he reveals it. His presence becomes a mirror that shows who is secure and who is surviving on borrowed confidence. What unsettles validation-driven personalities most is that they cannot control him, impress him, or sway him. Their usual tactics, compliments, pressure, social rewards, or subtle shaming bounce off him with no effect. His lack of interest and approval makes him unpredictable and untouchable. And in that quiet defiance of social dependency, he becomes the most powerful presence in the room, not by demanding recognition, but by never needing it in the first place. He forms deep connections quietly, shifting influence away from loud personalities. He doesn't build relationships through spectacle, charm, or social performance. Instead, he connects in a quiet, intentional way that bypasses surface-level interaction entirely. While loud personalities rely on volume, humor, or charisma to attract attention, he goes deeper, listening carefully, observing emotional nuance, and responding with sincerity rather than theatrics. This creates an immediate sense of trust. People feel seen by him in a way they rarely experience. They open up more, share more, and naturally gravitate toward his grounded presence. His connections aren't wide, but they are meaningful. And in any social environment, depth eventually outweighs noise. Alpha males notice this shift quickly. Their influence is built on commanding attention, leading conversations, and maintaining a visible presence. But the Sigma redirects influence subtly, without speaking more or appearing dominant. The people who were once drawn to the Alpha's energy start seeking the Sigma's insight instead. They begin turning to him for understanding, clarity, or support. Not because he asks for it, but because he provides something the loud personalities cannot: emotional safety, authenticity, and genuine resonance. This quiet redirection of loyalty threatens the Alpha's sense of control, because influence gained through depth is far more stable than influence gained through performance. The Sigma doesn't compete for followers or admiration. He simply creates a space where real connection feels possible. His calmness invites openness. His silence invites honesty. His presence invites trust. People sense that he won't judge them, manipulate them, or use their vulnerability as leverage. And because his connections form naturally, without social games or power displays, they hold more weight than the superficial bonds formed around the Alpha. The room's center of gravity begins to tilt not toward the loudest voice, but toward the one who understands rather than performs. This shift unsettles loud personalities because they can't stop it or replicate it. Their entire identity depends on being the focal point, yet the Sigma becomes the quiet anchor people lean toward without announcement. He doesn't try to become influential. He becomes influential simply by existing authentically. And that kind of power, rooted in emotional depth instead of dominance, is something no Alpha can chase, challenge, or control. He walks away from conflict or ego battles, making the Alpha's aggression look pointless. He never enters a confrontation to prove superiority, defend pride, or win dominance. When tension rises and egos flare, he simply steps back, calm, collected, and completely unshaken. This refusal to engage drains the conflict of its power instantly. While an Alpha expects the usual escalation, raised voices, tense stares, verbal sparring, the Sigma offers none of it. No reaction, no challenge, no emotional fuel. He knows that most conflicts are nothing more than displays of insecurity dressed as strength. By walking away, he exposes the performance behind the aggression. The Alpha finds himself standing alone, fighting a battle that no longer exists, looking louder rather than stronger. This behavior disrupts the entire social dynamic. People instinctively compare both responses: the Alpha, heated and visibly shaken by the need to assert dominance, and the Sigma, steady enough to disengage without losing dignity. The contrast is stark. The Alpha's anger begins to look like immaturity. The Sigma's restraint becomes a demonstration of mastery. The more the Alpha pushes, the more obvious it becomes that the Sigma is not participating in the game. He refuses to let ego drag him into emotional chaos. He chooses clarity over reaction, peace over posturing. And in that choice, he reveals where real strength resides. Walking away doesn't make him passive, it makes him untouchable. He isn't controlled by provocation, fear of judgment, or the pressure to defend himself publicly. He understands that most battles aren't worth fighting, especially when the goal is to entertain someone else's insecurity. His silence becomes a response that hits harder than any argument. It shows that his self-worth is not up for negotiation and that his path cannot be redirected by someone else's emotional volatility. This unnerves the alpha because conflict is often his arena of dominance. Yet here he stands facing someone who refuses to even enter the arena. In the end, people don't remember who shouted the loudest. They remember who stayed grounded. They remember who kept control, who preserved dignity, and who didn't let anger dictate action. The Sigma's departure becomes the defining moment, the calm act that renders the Alpha's aggression meaningless. And in that quiet exit, he proves a deeper truth. The strongest man in the room isn't the one who fights the hardest. It's the one who doesn't need to fight at all. When the noise fades and the power games lose their spark, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Sigma never needed to dominate to win. His calm, his depth, his strategic silence, and his refusal to feed ego battles set him apart in a world obsessed with performance. He doesn't rise by force. He rises by not falling into the traps that pull everyone else down. And that's why he becomes the most unsettling, most intriguing, and most quietly influential presence in any room. If you're still here, it means this world of silent strength and psychological precision resonates with you. So don't just watch from the sidelines, step deeper into it. Click subscribe, join the community, and be part of the journey where we uncover the rare traits that shape Sigma minds. And if you're ready for the next level, drop a comment with silent power so I know you're one of the few who truly gets it.